Of all the places a future king could be driven on a Saturday morning, you would expect somewhere grand: a palace, a polished hall, a car with darkened windows, and a guard at the door. But not little Prince Louis, the boy who is fourth in line to the British throne after his father Prince William, his brother Prince George, and his sister Princess Charlotte, would rather be somewhere else entirely. He would rather be knee-deep in a cold, muddy field on the edge of Windsor, with a small trowel in his hand and dirt under his fingernails, and honestly, once you see him out there, you understand why. This weekend, the youngest son of Prince William and Princess Catherine did something that surprised a lot of people. He spent his Saturday with a local junior archaeology club. Not a royal event, not a parade. Just a group of children, a few patient volunteers, some ropes marking out squares in the soil, and a slow, careful dig into the ground beneath an old field that has been part of Windsor's story for a very long time. No crowds waving flags, no balcony, just a boy and the earth and the question every child loves to ask: what is down there? You have probably watched Louis at the big royal moments. You have seen him on the balcony pulling faces. You have seen him fidget through long church services and experiment with new ways to wave at the crowd. That is the Louis the cameras usually catch, but there is another side to him, and it is the side that comes out when nobody is performing for anyone, when the job in front of him is real and slow and a little bit messy. That is the side we got to see this weekend, and it tells you more about the little prince than any official photograph ever could. Here is the thesis, and it is a simple one. This royal child is at his happiest when he is allowed to be an ordinary, curious boy, not a prince on display, not a future king being watched. Just a 5-year-old who wants to know what the world looked like before he arrived and who is willing to get filthy to find out. Stay with us, because the story of Louis at this dig is one of the most charming things you will see all year, and it ends in a way that genuinely melted the people who were there. Let us set the scene. The field sits a short drive from the heart of Windsor, the same Windsor whose castle has watched over kings and queens for almost 1,000 years. But the dig was not interested in kings. That is the lovely twist already. This particular patch of ground was once close to where ordinary working people lived and worked in the Victorian era. Servants, laborers, the people who carried the coal, mended the fences, scrubbed the floors, and walked the long road home in the dark. The Junior Archaeology Club was searching for the small, broken, everyday things, those people left behind. Not gold, not crowns, just the leftovers of normal life from more than 100 years ago. And into the middle of that, in a pair of wellies and a jacket that was clearly chosen for getting ruined, came Prince Louis. You could see right away that he had been told what this was. He knew the people who used to live here were not famous. He knew there would be no treasure chest. And he did not seem disappointed by that for a single second. If anything, he seemed more excited because of it. There is something about Louis that responds to the small and the real far more than to the grand and the shiny, and we are about to spend the next few minutes watching exactly that happen. So put your imagination in that cold Berkshire field. Picture the rope squares laid out on the grass. Picture the volunteers in muddy knees explaining the rules. Picture a row of children leaning forward and one small prince at the end of the row, already reaching for a trowel before anyone had finished talking. Because once Louis decides he is interested in something, waiting politely is not really his strong point. And what happened next surprised everyone who thought they knew what this little boy was like. Part 2. The first thing that struck the volunteers, the thing they kept mentioning afterwards, was how seriously he took it. You would expect a 5-year-old at a dig to last about 4 minutes. You would expect him to scoop one big handful of mud, get bored, and go looking for a stick. That is the normal arc of a small child in a patch of dirt, but that is not what happened. When the dig leader knelt down at the edge of the trench and showed the children how to do it properly, Louis went quiet, genuinely quiet. He watched the way the trowel was held, flat and gentle, scraping rather than stabbing. He watched the soft brush sweep the loose soil away a little at a time. And then he copied it slowly, carefully, with a level of focus that, frankly, a lot of adults do not have. The volunteer leading the group explained it to the children in the simplest way. You do not attack the ground, she told them. You ask it questions, you take a little, and you take a little more, and you look again. The earth has been keeping these things safe for over 100 years. So the least you can do is be gentle with them now. And Louis, the boy famous for being anything but gentle on a royal balcony, took that completely to heart. He knelt at a square, leaned right over it, and began to work with the kind of patience nobody quite expected from him. Fans have seen this before in flashes. They were amazed at Trooping the Color when Louis matched his brother George and wore a tie and jacket like the grown-up royals do. They saw him hold himself with real dignity at his grandfather, King Charles's coronation, when the whole world was watching and a lot of small children would have fallen apart. People started to say then that there might be a serious side to this little prince after all, that underneath the cheeky balcony boy, there was someone capable of rising to a moment when it really counted. The dig was proof of that. But in a quieter, Lavilliere way. There was no audience here, no coronation cameras, no reason at all to behave except that the work itself asked him to, and he did. He brushed soil away from a small dark shape and did not grab at it. He looked up at the volunteer first, the way he had been told to, and waited until she came over to check. For a boy whose whole public reputation is built on not being able to wait for anything, that single moment of patience was genuinely remarkable. The people around the trench actually went a bit silent watching it. He kept going, too, square by square, brush, look, brush, look. He found the rhythm of it, and he stayed in it far longer than anyone had bet he would. At one point, he was so close to the ground that his nose was almost touching the soil. His whole little body folded over the trench, completely absorbed. That is not a boy performing for a camera. That is a boy who has forgotten cameras exist. And there's something wonderful about seeing a future king disappear so completely into a job that has nothing royal about it at all. Now, before we get carried away, we have to be fair, because as impressive as all of this was, let us not forget who we are talking about. This is still Prince Louis. He is still only a small boy. And asking him to stay perfectly still and perfectly careful for a whole morning is asking a lot of a child who, by his own family's account, has more energy than the rest of them put together. The patience was real, but it was always going to have a limit. And that limit, when it arrived, was very, very Louis. Part 3, it started, as these things always start with him, with the wriggling. You could see it building. The careful kneeling slowly became careful kneeling with one leg jiggling. The slow brushing got a little faster, then a little faster again, until the volunteer had to gently remind him that the soil was not going anywhere and neither were the things hiding in it. Louis nodded very seriously, took a deep breath, slowed himself right down for about 10 whole seconds, and then sped straight back up again. Who can blame him? The boy is 5. Patience for him is a muscle he is still very much learning to use, and you could practically watch him straining it. Then came the questions. So many questions. What is this? What is that? How old is it? Who dropped it? Did they mean to drop it? Were they in trouble? Why did they not pick it up? Was it cold when they lived here? Did children live here too? Did they have to dig? The volunteers said afterwards that they had never been asked so many things so quickly by one small person. And the wonderful part is that none of the questions were silly. They were the questions of a boy genuinely trying to picture the people who used to stand exactly where he was standing, and the mud. Oh, the mud. By the middle of the morning, Louis was wearing most of the field. It was on his knees, obviously, because that is where knees go on a dig, but it was also on his sleeves, somehow up to the elbow. It was across one cheek. There was a magnificent streak of it directly on the end of his nose, which he had clearly put there himself by scratching an itch with a filthy hand, and which he did not know was there, and which nobody had the heart to tell him about. For quite a while, he looked frankly delighted to be that dirty. For Louis, being completely covered in mud is not an accident. It is a sign that the day is going extremely well. But here's where the story turns warm, because all of that restless energy did not pull him away from the dig. It poured straight into it. This is the comparison that the people watching kept reaching for. Think of how his great-grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, carried a deep, lifelong love of her horses and the countryside. A love that had nothing to do with crowns and everything to do with the simple things she truly cared about. Think of how Prince George is slowly growing into a quieter, more serious version of himself, finding the parts of royal life that genuinely interest him. Louis, in his own muddy way, was doing the very same thing. He was finding his version of it. And his version, it turns out, lives in the dirt. There was one moment that the volunteers said they will not forget. The dig leader sat down next to him, properly down in the mud beside him, and explained what kind of person might have used the kinds of things they were finding. She told him about the working families who had lived near here in the Victorian times. People who got up before the sun, people who worked with their hands until their hands were sore. Children not much older than him who did not go to dig as a fun club on a Saturday, but who worked because their families needed them to. She did not make it heavy, she just made it real. And Louis went completely still and listened. The streak of mud still on his nose, his eyes very wide, you could see something land in him. Not sadness, exactly. More like the first time a child realizes that the world is much bigger and much older than them, and that real people with cold hands and tired feet and their own small worries. once stood right here, long before anyone thought a prince might one day kneel in their field. It is a big thought for a small boy, and the lovely thing is, he did not run away from it. He leaned into it. He picked up his trowel again, more carefully than before, as if the ground had just become something he wanted to be even gentler with. That was the moment the day stopped being a fun outing and became something he was actually going to remember. And it set up what happened next. When the rest of his family arrived to see how he was getting on, and Louis showed them all exactly what he had found and exactly how much it meant to him. Part 4 by now, you may be wondering where everyone else was, because a day out with Louis is never really a one-person job. The first to step into the story properly was Princess Charlotte, and of course, she did it in the most Charlotte way possible. Where Louis was all energy and mud and noise, his big sister was order and care. She had taken on the job of helping to lay the small finds out, the careful work of placing each little object on a tray, keeping the bits from one square separate from the bits from another, making sure nothing got muddled. She has always been the one with an instinct for how things should be done properly, and you could see it here. While Louis dug things up with great drama, Charlotte calmly made sure they did not get lost the moment they came out of the ground. The two of them side by side were a perfect little picture of how differently siblings can love the very same thing. Then there was the volunteer leading the dig, who by this point had become something close to Louis's personal hero. He followed her around the trenches asking what each tray held. She did not talk down to him and she did not dress it up. She just told him in plain words what an old worn button might say about the person who lost it, or why a broken piece of plain pottery was, in its own way, far more honest about real life than anything golden ever could be. According to the people there, she told the children that the small broken things are the true story because nobody keeps the everyday objects on purpose. They only survive by accident. And Louis repeated that back to himself quietly, like he was filing it somewhere important. And then, of course, came his mother. Princess Catherine has always been the steady center of these children, the one who keeps the day from tipping over the edge, and you saw it the moment she arrived. There is a particular way Kate has of arriving into a scene of total chaos and gently lowering the temperature without ever raising her voice. She did not march over and scold him for the mud. She knelt down to his level in the field and let him show her. That is the thing about how Catherine handles her youngest. She has made it very clear. She wants her children to have as normal a childhood as possible, away from the spotlight, close to real life. A muddy field full of broken Victorian pottery is about as close to real life as a royal Saturday can get, and she let him have every second of it. There was even a small familiar comparison hanging in the air. People remembered how George, on his early public days, was the more cautious one, the boy who once tried to hide behind his father's back on his first day of school. Louis has always been the opposite, charging at new things with zero fear, and the dig was exactly that. While other children hung back from the deepest, messiest trench, Louis went straight for it. Same family, two very different boys, and the contrast is part of what makes watching them grow up so endearing. But the moment everyone there talks about, the one that genuinely melted the people standing around that trench, was small. It always is with Louis. Near the end of the morning, he had found something he refused to let go of. It was not gold, it was not jewels. It was a broken piece of an old clay pipe, the kind a working man might have smoked on his walk home 150 years ago, snapped and stained and worth absolutely nothing to anyone. To Louis, it was the most important thing in the field. He would not put it on the tray with the others. He was worried it would get lost among the bigger pieces, worried it would be forgotten. This little broken thing that some tired person had once held in their hand, so he carried it very carefully across the muddy grass to his mother. He did not hand it over carelessly the way children usually hand things to their parents. He cupped it in both his small, filthy palms, and he pressed it gently into Catherine's hands, and he told her to keep it safe. Keep it safe. A future king asking his mother to protect the broken pipe of a forgotten working man as if it were a crown jewel. The volunteers said you could have heard a pin drop. Kate closed her hands around it like it was exactly as precious as he believed it was. Because in that moment, to him, it was part 5. So let us talk about everything this little boy loved about a day that, on paper, sounds like nothing a prince should enjoy at all. He loved the dirt, not tolerated it, loved it. The muddier he got, the happier he became, until he was less a prince and more a small enthusiastic creature made entirely of soil. He loved the snacks the club handed out halfway through, eaten with hands he had absolutely not washed, which is its own kind of relatable if you have ever been a child outdoors and decided that a little mud never hurt anyone. He loved the digging itself, the simple repeated joy of brush, Look, brush, look, find. He loved the trays of broken things far more than he would ever have loved a glass case of shining ones. And most of all, more than anything else that day, he loved asking about the people. The ones who lived here, the ones nobody made statues of, the ones whose whole lives fit into a handful of broken pottery and one snapped clay pipe. Surprising, isn't it? We spend so much time watching royal children at the grand events, the balconies and the carriages and the coronations, that it is genuinely lovely to be reminded that the things that light them up are often the smallest, plainest things in the world: a field, a trowel, a volunteer who answers every single question, a broken object that belonged to someone ordinary, treated like treasure by a boy who will one day be king. There's a whole quiet lesson in that, and you do not need to spell it out to a 5-year-old for him to feel it. He felt it. You could see he felt it. It honestly feels like just yesterday that Luis was the toddler on the balcony, the one pulling faces and covering his ears, the smallest figure being gently shushed by his mother while the world laughed along. And here he was, kneeling in a cold field, asking serious questions about people who died long before he was born, handing a broken pipe to his mom and telling her to look after it. They grow up so fast. He still has plenty of the old Louis in him, the wriggling and the mud-streaked nose and the impatience that never fully switches off. But there's something new in him now, too, something that came out of the ground in that field, along with all those broken little pieces. He is not without his soft spots, of course, he never has been. We all know he does not love loud, sudden noises the way he has never been a fan of the roar of airplanes at the air shows. There was a bit of that even here, when a piece of heavy equipment somewhere across the field started up with a bang and he flinched and looked around just for a second, the small boy underneath the little archaeologist showing through. But the lovely thing is, he did not want to go home this time. He turned straight back to his trench. Whatever was down there in that soil was, for once, more interesting to him than the thing that had startled him. And as he grows, you hope that is the pattern that wins: curiosity beating fear. The next question pulling him forward every single time. So here's the quiet thought to leave you with. One day, this muddy little boy may stand at the very top of one of the oldest thrones in the world. He may wear the crown and carry the weight and be watched by everyone. And if he carries even a little of this Saturday with him, the part that knelt in the cold and asked who used to live here and held a stranger's broken pipe like it mattered, then he will have learned the thing that the grandest palace could never teach him: that history is not only made of kings, it is made of the ordinary people who carried the coal and walked the long road home.